people should actually thank mass media for creating the narrative. Otherwise, the society would have no anchor and would collapse on itself already, I would argue, already right now. So the proverbial mainstream narrative, as insane as it is actually almost the only thing that still keeps the world sane. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert D. Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video I wish to address various complaints about mass media today, and also the end of history, but not in the stupid Fukuyama sense, but in an actual sense, and arguably much more horrifying even, alright? Actually, it's gonna be fine. Believe me, it's only gonna look horrifying for us right now. So, yeah. So, in my video, Stories of History, I've talked about, and some others probably, I talked about how the history is almost entirely associated with national states. The history as we know it. I'm gonna link all the videos I mentioned in the description, and some other links as well, probably. So, and here it would be fruitful to consider the ways of spreading of information, right? So national states obviously require certain centralization, some bureaucracy, etc., so they require some means of transfer of information. So roughly speaking, before 1500, the year 1500, that is, how do you call it, AD, alright, in the current chronology, we've had basically darkness. So again, before 1500, you can disregard all of history as fairy tales, except for ancient times, like ancient Greece and Rome. Well, that's a whole separate topic, okay? Then we have an epoch of muddy optics, roughly speaking, or blurry optics, if you wish, where something is visible, but not quite. So that's basically all the 1500s until 1600. Then we have the informational era, the era of optics, where printing was invented. So stuff is visible, alright? And that corresponds to modernity, to industrial age, etc., etc. So that's the informational era, if you wish. And then we have a hyper-informational era in roughly since the beginning or the middle of the 20th century, plus or minus, something like that, right? So mass media, roughly speaking, okay? However, currently we're living in like a super hyper-information era. We have the internet, right? So it's more like, you know, like previously there was not enough info, but maybe not so much stuff happened. Then more stuff happened, but there was still not enough info. Then the amount of stuff happening and the amount of info was roughly the same. And now we have that there's much more information but not so much stuff is happening, you know, something like that. So the balance is completely skewed into the other side. And we can see sort of like the reversing of this trend as a consequence of this. So we are kind of moving backwards in this progression, and we are already past, arguably, the informational era, and we're already in the muddy or blurry optics again. We're like in the 16th century, informationally speaking, all right? And we are, again, I argue, as well as some others, the people who I follow intellectually in this regard at least, so we argue that humanity is going to enter basically the new dark ages, but not necessarily in the way, well, again, it's a kind of a separate topic, even though it's related to this video, but I don't want to like ruminate on it too much. But basically, I'm not saying that the information would be destroyed. It's more like it would be like, well, completely different, let's say. Like the way of producing, transferring, and consuming information would be completely different with respect to what it is right now. Or maybe not completely different, but like something like radically different would be there. Let's put it this way. So after the year 2100, that's a strong statement, I agree, but it is what it is. So after 2100, history would end completely, basically. So as there would be no, you know, national states, therefore we would completely reverse into the Dark Ages. So there would be no narrative spine, so to speak, to humanity, and history would be completely fractured. Not fractured in the sense of, like, again, some sort of temporal discontinuity, but more like in all kinds of senses, discontinuity, right? So again, especially this is true regarding the start of the solar system colonization at the end of this century and at the beginning of the next one, all right? So right now, again, addressing this topic of people complaining, oh, the leftist mass media is like a psychosis, hysteria, like, how do they call it? Like mass-driven psychosis or whatever. Like somebody like dug out some idiot who coined this term, like whatever. Mass formation psychosis, right? Something like that. So whatever. So yeah, oh, whatever. Twitter hive mind. Oh yeah, people are insane. Blah blah blah. So yeah, there is a narrative. People follow it. It's kind of insane. Yeah, to some degree. But again, my argument is that if not for this synchronicity of mass media and the social networks for that matter, the world would stop making sense already. You know. So we kind of need actually a continuous narrative to find ourselves in the world, to like again orient, etc., etc. So even if you're against the narrative, at least there is something to be against. You know, there is some some anchor, so to speak. So, and the point of the end of history is exactly that. It's the end of these big narratives. By the way, watch my video about the franchises, where I say how like this fracturing of culture is already seen in like literature and cinema, etc. So we would observe this discontinuation of social fabric, basically tearing it apart. So, and again, it's all caused by this very same process of like demolition of hierarchies, demolition of centralized states, motion towards this post-national, post-historic, you might say, consciousness, right? So, or historical, whatever it is. So yeah. And it could have been noticeable already beforehand, like before that. So narratives already since the 1970s, right? Roughly the time of when postmodernism appeared. So the narratives already back then were starting to become more and more virtual, right? So you might argue, like again, very, very metaphorically speaking, esoterically speaking, the world actually died in a nuclear apocalypse in the 1960s, right? And since then, all the wars, and therefore, like the normal mode of being of a centralized state, aka the war, are purely virtual, right? Which reminds me of this Star Trek episode called A Taste of Armageddon. I'm gonna link some plot description and like synopsis in the description, so see the links there. So where you have like a completely virtual wars, right? Or proxy wars, like the war between the EU and the US currently territorially happening in Ukraine. Again, see my video on Ukraine, whereas it's evil Putin, yeah, whatever, guys. So yeah, it's so virtual, it's like insane actually. So Philip Dick has this novel, Ubik, U-B-I-K, which is about this, like how the world, like people die and they start seeing strange things. Well, this is what happened to our world in the early 70s or late 60s. We died in a nuclear apocalypse and we start seeing strange things, right? So yeah. But imagine the near future again. Imagine the year, I don't know, 2070, not even speaking about 2100. So, the history, like, as we know it, like, it would make no sense absolutely for many, many reasons. One of the reasons I've already said, like this fracturing of hierarchies, right? Demolition of centralized narratives. So after the American hegemony, we will even have like European non-hegemony, as I've said in one of the videos. I'm going to link in the description how Europe will rule the world or something like that. So we'll have, so history is based on what? On sources, right? But sources should be like legit, genuine, right? But what if you can actually manufacture any sources you wish, like on the fly, like that, you know? And it's already like more or less clear how it's gonna happen, right? You can pretty much fake any video today already. You can pretty much fake any photo, like it's completely easily done, right? You can manufacture more or less any like material evidence with like advanced 3D printing or whatever the heck. So sources become pointless, you know? Like whatever, like guys, you can literally make your own version of history, like right now, if you have the resources, all right? So, but not only that, it's only like on a naive level, if you perceive history as like objective science, you know, even though I said that it's not science, it's an art actually. But if you are super naive and you perceive it as a science, then even on that level, it would be completely demolished, right? But, so returning to what I've said about virtuality, like the virtual world since the 1970s. So virtuality, if you think about it, is the pinnacle of the written word, right? It's the pinnacle of written language, written text, if you wish. So much so that the people, like after the concept of virtuality has appeared, people has sort of reinvented the Bible, right? Now they say that, see my video about the universe as a simulation, how the world was written not in the word as the Bible says, but in the computer code, which is ultimately the other version of the same word, right? Also see my video, E.th.ph, where I say that actually your genetic code is probably the most important language, right? Okay, so, yeah, so, and this virtuality, this ultimate form of written text, right, of, like, you might also argue that mathematics is another version of that. So, and physics and all of that is tied together, essentially. I mean, what is physics? It's an attempt to study the universe, describing it in the language of mathematics, right? So, it's also telling the story about the world in the language of mathematics, something like that. So, virtuality is the pinnacle of this written text, and it's deeply connected to the upcoming space colonization, upcoming in near century, that's what I mean. So, yeah, in the virtual worlds, you can literally create worlds, you know, with a word, like again, with computer code. You can create a whole universe, like a whole MMR, you know, or how do you call it? MMO, what is it? Massive multiplayer online game, right? Something like that. So that would be, in a way you can create an MMO, like with decently advanced technology, you can create an MMO with like alternative history, right? And at some point it would become so advanced that it would actually be indistinguishable, you know, in terms of like a proof from the real world, you know, the real history, again, very, very naively speaking. So yeah, and you can again produce literally like cross-referenced narratives with plenty of material evidence. Like you can have AI producing you all these texts, then printers making the manuscripts or whatever, printing the rocks or whatever, planting the isotopes of needed elements where it's needed, etc., etc. So blah, blah, blah. And the colonization of the solar system, just think about it. So even the time itself, which is like the main, you know, staple of history, the time itself. So even the time itself would become fractured after we start colonizing the solar system, because there is literally like, you know, a couple of seconds of difference between Earth and the moon even, right? Not even talking about Mars or even the bodies that are farther away. So, and it's like, why? There's one time on the moon, literally like different time on the moon than it is on the Earth. And it's not like it's behind, and it's not like whether it's behind or ahead us, like it depends on perspective, right? So, there you go. There you go. There's one narrative on the moon, like Earth is actually like behind us, because if we go there, we go backwards in time or forwards. I don't know. I don't care, to be honest. And on the Earth, it's vice versa. You know, like it's backwards, and you get the idea, right? On the Mars, it's already like on the order of tens of minutes. So they literally live in a completely different, like parallel history almost, right? It's a different time. All right. So, yeah. So, again, returning to what I've started from, people should actually thank mass media for creating the narrative. Otherwise, the society would have no anchor and would collapse on itself already, I would argue, already right now. So, the proverbial mainstream narrative, as insane as it is actually almost the only thing that still keeps the world sane. So, yeah. And speaking about the other ways of like organizing narratively your own life or like the life of the society, sports events might be another example, right? Another way of structuring the society. And again, the very first truly civilized society, at least the one that we all like. I mean, okay, that might be too general, but okay, I would say European civilization, right? The main source of European civilization, which is ancient Greece. That is exactly the perfect example of this way of organizing your society temporally. From sports events, right? What was the base of the Greek calendar? It was the first Olympics. Imagine that, right? So they've had this tournament periodically occurring, and only basically this tournament kept the Greece together, if you wish. There was no Greece as it is, you know. It was a super vague association of isolated policies, right? Isolated little towns with like, I don't know, 2,000 citizens, or maybe, I don't know, 2,000 is probably already a lot. You know, Athens had like, I don't know how many, maybe 50,000 at its absolute peak, you know. But most of the time it was much lower than that. So yeah, there was no Greece. So you might perceive, you know, even the name like Grecia, like this Latin name, Graecia Magna, right? What it was like the southern Italy, southeast of Italy, like this Apulia, the heel of the boot, you know, and the surrounding region, and perhaps it also included Sicily, I don't know, I don't remember. But roughly this region, right? That was what was called Greece, strictly speaking, you know. So yeah. Olympics, like returning, kind of tying this to the concept of MMO, right? So Olympics was this very first MMO, like a virtual glue that kind of kept the Greek society together, right? Kind of gave it the continuous narrative, if you wish. And thus, even in a way, like created the Greece, right? Like they've been able to record their history because they've had this anchor, this continuous narrative of Olympics. And again, with the world becoming more and more virtual, who's to say that like the VR, virtual reality, and like online gaming wouldn't be the same thing, right? Wouldn't wouldn't bring up the same thing. Like imagine people counting like eras with like World of Warcraft patches or something. I mean, if the whole humanity, or at least like third of humanity, let's say, plays this game, like they would like, and it would be like super important for some reason. Like, I don't know. I mean, it sounds absurd, but like try to think about it and try to actually like imagine a more decent version of it. Not exactly the World of Warcraft, but there will be something similar, you know, in the future. So yeah, we've had this era, you know, like we've had Middle Ages, then the Renaissance, then the modernity. We've had patch number, I don't know, 12.1572. Then we've had a patch, I don't know, 13.5061. And like, these are different eras, you know. So something like that. And on Mars, you can't even play with, in the same game, right? You have your own time because there's a delay. You can't play online with people from Earth. So there you go. A different history, parallel universe almost, right? Yeah. Or even in your own life, if you think about, like, if you think about your past, like, how do you remember things? Because I always try to tie, like, if you ask me what happened in 2017, I would try to remember where I worked, who I've dated, and, like, probably that would be, like, the main things I would try to remember, because those things kind of tie everything else together, you know, in a way. So these are kind of long things that happen in your life, and then like the small things can be associated with those longer things by literally by association, right? Or like how fat I was, because there was a period when I was pretty fat, so you know, but I would still probably remember it through some other events or some large conferences I've attended. That's another thing. Yeah. Okay, so that would probably be all. So to conclude what I've talked about in this video, I apologize for it being a little bit too chaotic, but the topic deserves to be such, because again, I'm talking about the demolition of narratives. It would be kind of silly for me to bring it in the form of a complete non-fractured narrative, if you know what I mean, right? There you go, a good justification of my own laziness. So yeah, we've talked about the end of history. The history would end, long story short, roughly in the year 2100, when the American hegemony would end completely. It would probably end before that, maybe even much earlier than that, but in roughly 2100, Europe will start dominating the world, but it would do so in a non-hegemonic way, and will start colonizing the solar system. And again, like, history would make no sense since then, for many reasons outlined above, right? History would be way too easy to satisfy. And like, people are complaining about fake news and stuff. Well, you know, the problem is, on ontological level, the problem is that all news is fake, right? But in the future, it would become not only obvious, but it would become practical, if you wish. You either live on Mars and you have this timeline, this history, this World of Warcraft patch, and your own server, or you live on Earth and you have this other patch, this other timeline, and this other server, right? So yeah, you're in a completely different histories from now on. There you go. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.